The courtroom was packed, tension heavy in the air. On one side, a seasoned black lawyer prepared to argue a case that could change everything for his client. On the bench sat a judge who had already decided he wasn't worth taking seriously. She smirked, even let out a laugh, dismissing his presence as if he were a child who wandered into a world that didn't belong to him. But what happened next stunned everyone. Within minutes, the laughter stopped, the smirk disappeared, and the judge's gavel, her very symbol of power, was no longer in her hand. The story begins in a bustling courthouse in the heart of the city. The black lawyer, Malcolm Carter, had worked tirelessly to build his career. He had risen from a childhood marked by poverty and systemic barriers, earning scholarships and degrees that many said were beyond his reach. Today, he stood ready to defend a client whose case carried the weight of injustice that went far beyond the walls of this courtroom. But from the very start, things felt off. The presiding judge, known for her sharp tongue and old-school views, eyed Malcolm with a mixture of amusement and disdain. She interrupted his opening remarks, rolled her eyes at his carefully constructed arguments, and at one point chuckled as if his very presence was an inconvenience. The spectators noticed too, some whispering in discomfort, others nodding as if they expected nothing less. Malcolm's client, a young black man accused of a crime he didn't commit, looked on with fear, realizing that even his lawyer wasn't being treated with respect. Still, Malcolm pressed forward. Every document, every precedent, every shred of evidence had been meticulously prepared. But no matter what he presented, the judge brushed it aside with thinly veiled contempt. The courtroom had become more than a legal battleground. It was a stage for humiliation. Yet beneath Malcolm's calm exterior was a quiet storm. Years of endurance, resilience, and an unshakable belief in justice fueled him. And in that very courtroom, where he was mocked and dismissed, the tide was about to turn in a way no one could have predicted. As the proceedings continued, the tension grew unbearable. Malcolm laid out the facts of the case, flawed police reports, missing evidence, and contradictions in witness statements. But the judge barely glanced at the files. At one point, she leaned back in her chair, smirked, and asked if Malcolm was done wasting the court's time. Laughter rippled from a few corners of the room, a cruel echo that stung like a slap. For Malcolm, this wasn't just about one case. It was about the countless times he had been underestimated, doubted or dismissed because of the color of his skin. He remembered professors who questioned whether he belonged in law school, colleagues who assumed he was an assistant instead of an attorney, and clients who looked surprised when he introduced himself as their legal counsel. Each memory burned in his mind as he stood there, the weight of history pressing down. But Malcolm didn't falter. Instead, he shifted gears. He began citing cases from the Supreme Court, carefully chosen precedents that directly supported his client's innocence. His tone sharpened, his presence commanded attention. The laughter subsided, giving way to silence. Even the spectators who doubted him leaned in, drawn by the undeniable force of his argument. Then, the moment came. Malcolm revealed a crucial piece of evidence, a video that had been overlooked. The footage showed his client nowhere near the scene of the crime at the time it occurred. The courtroom gasped. The prosecution stumbled, caught off guard, their narrative unraveling before everyone's eyes. The judge, however, seemed cornered. She tried to object, dismiss the video as inadmissible. Still, Malcolm calmly pointed to legal precedents and procedural rules that left her with no choice. Her smirk was gone now, replaced by a thin line of frustration. The power she wielded so effortlessly was slipping from her grasp, and everyone in the room could feel it. Malcolm's client sat straighter, hope returning to his eyes. The spectators who had once doubted were now witnessing something they couldn't ignore. A black lawyer not just holding his ground, but dismantling an entire system of prejudice in real time. The energy in the room shifted. What began as humiliation was turning into vindication. And the climax of this battle was still to come. The turning point came when the judge tried one last desperate move. She slammed her gavel, declaring the evidence too prejudicial to consider. But before she could finish her sentence, a higher court official, summoned earlier by Malcolm's quiet request, entered the courtroom. This official, a senior judicial inspector, had been notified about complaints against the very judge in question. Malcolm had anticipated the resistance and came prepared not just with evidence for his client, but also with a formal report of the judge's misconduct, supported by multiple affidavits from attorneys who had faced similar treatment. The inspector announced an immediate review of the judge's conduct. Gasps filled the courtroom as the official turned directly to Malcolm, affirming that the evidence he presented would be admitted. The judge's face drained of color. For the first time, she was the one on trial. Not the lawyer she mocked, not the client she dismissed, but her own behavior. When she attempted to object, the inspector silenced her. With cameras rolling and reporters scribbling notes, the symbolism was undeniable. The gavel she had slammed so arrogantly was taken from her desk, not as a tool of authority, but as evidence in an inquiry that could end her career. The once smug judge sat in silence, her laughter now a haunting memory of arrogance undone. And Malcolm, standing tall before the court, knew this moment was bigger than any single case. It was justice, not just for his client, but for every black professional ever told they weren't enough. Ultimately, Malcolm's client was exonerated, and the charges were dismissed with prejudice. The relief on the young man's face said more than words ever could. For him, freedom meant a second chance at life, a chance denied to so many others who never had an advocate like Malcolm fighting for them. As for the judge, her misconduct led to suspension pending further investigation. The gavel she once used as a weapon of power had become a symbol of her downfall. And in the days that followed, news outlets across the country reported on the story. A black lawyer mocked in court only to dismantle prejudice in front of everyone. But the impact went deeper. Law students of color began sharing Malcolm's story online, calling him an inspiration. Community leaders pointed to his victory as proof that resilience could break barriers. And countless viewers who watched the courtroom footage felt a shift, an undeniable reminder that racism may still lurk in institutions. Still, it can be challenged, resisted, and overturned. For Malcolm, the victory wasn't just professional, it was personal. He had walked into that courtroom knowing the odds were stacked against him, knowing that every laugh and every sneer was designed to break him. Yet he walked out having not only cleared his client's name, but exposed a system of bias. And as he stood on the courthouse steps, reporters swarming, microphones flashing, Malcolm offered only one statement. Justice is not a privilege, it's a right. And today, we reminded the world of that truth. The story leaves us with a question. How many more Malcolms must fight to prove their worth before equality is not the exception, but the rule?